Please marry me.
Please marry me. Lonely rancher begs the caged giant bride. Everyone feared, and what happened next shock everyone. Please marry me. The words fell from Matthias Cordell's lips like stones into deep water, heavy and final. His knees sank into the cold Montana mud, and pain shot up his damaged spine, the kind of pain that had become his constant companion since the day a stallion named Judgment had crushed him against a fence post. But Matthias didn't move, didn't flinch. He pressed his calloused hands against the iron bars of the cage and stared up at the woman everyone in Redemption Springs called a monster. Willa Brenneman sat inside that cage with her knees drawn up to her chest, trying desperately to make herself small. An impossible task for a woman who stood nearly 7 feet tall. Her shoulders touched the bars on both sides. Her head bowed forward to keep from hitting the top. Even folded up like this, she looked massive, powerful, terrifying. But her eyes told a different story. Those storm-gray eyes held nothing but exhaustion and shame as she looked down at the broken rancher kneeling in the mud before her. "You mock me, sir," Willa said quietly, her voice carrying the precise edges of education that seemed wildly out of place, coming from a woman displayed like a circus animal. "As they all do." Around them, the crowd pressed closer. Widow Penelope Sutherland clutched her lace handkerchief to her mouth, her face pale with shock. Reverend Josiah Makepeace gripped his Bible so tight his knuckles turned white. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and frightened. Everyone had heard about the giant mail-order bride that Silas Grimm had brought to town 3 weeks ago. Everyone had paid their 2 bits to stare at her through the bars. Everyone had whispered about what kind of desperate fool would actually marry such a creature. Now they had their answer. Matthias Cordell, 34 years old, widowed, limping, and 60 days away from losing the ranch his grandfather had carved out of the wilderness. The loneliest man in 3 territories, begging the woman everyone feared to become his wife. "I'm not mocking you," Matthias said, and his voice cracked with something raw and real. "I'm drowning, Miss Brenneman, and I think maybe you are too." Silas Grimm pushed through the crowd, his weasel face twisted in a cruel grin. Tobacco juice stained the corners of his mouth. His eyes held the calculated gleam of a man who'd found profit in other people's misery. "You gone soft in the head, Cordell." Grimm laughed, and several men in the crowd chuckled nervously with him. "That creature will crush you in your sleep. She's near 7 feet tall and strong as 3 men. I seen her bend a horseshoe with her bare hands. You really want to bring that into your bed?" The word creature hit Willa like a physical blow. Matthias saw her flinch, saw her try to curl even smaller inside her cage, saw the way her large, scarred hands trembled as she gripped her threadbare skirt. Something fierce and protective surged through his chest. "She's not a creature," Matthias said, and this time his voice carried steel. "She's a lady, and I'm asking her, no, I'm begging her, to marry me." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Widow Sutherland looked like she might faint. 2 children started crying. Somewhere in the back, a man cursed under his breath. But Matthias kept his eyes locked on Willa. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said quietly, speaking only to her now, as if the crowd had ceased to exist. "Prudence. She died bringing our son into the world, and he died with her. I lost them both in one night, Miss Brenneman. Lost the only good things I ever had." Willa's expression softened just slightly. Her rigid shoulders dropped half an inch. "Then I lost my health," Matthias continued. "Horse crushed my spine 2 years back, left me with this limp, made me slow, made me weak. The women in this town—" He didn't look at Widow Sutherland, but she knew. They made it clear a broken man isn't worth their time. "Mr. Cordell, I never said," Sutherland began, her face flushing. You said I was half a man, Matthias cut her off flatly. You said a woman needs a whole man, not half of one. I believe those were your exact words when you rejected my courtship last autumn. The widow's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Matthias turned back to Willa. Now I'm 60 days from losing my ranch. The bank sent the final notice. 2,000 acres of prime grazing land that my grandfather fought for, my father died defending, and I can't keep because I can't work it alone anymore. Can't mend the fences, can't manage the cattle, can't do what needs doing. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his coat pocket and held it up. The official foreclosure notice from Territorial Bank, stamped and dated. So yes, Miss Brenneman, I'm desperate, I'm lonely, I'm broken and bitter, and I know I'm not much of a prize. Matthias's hands tightened on the bars. But I'm also honest. I need help. I need someone strong enough to do the work I can't, and in return, I can offer you something nobody else will. What could you possibly offer me? Willa whispered. Freedom, Matthias said simply. A home, respectability, a name that isn't creature or monster or that thing in the cage. I can offer you a life where you're a wife, not livestock. Tears spilled down Willa's face, cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. And I promise you this, Matthias added, his voice dropping so low only she could hear. I will never, ever put you back in a cage. Willa's hands gripped the bars from the inside, her fingers just inches from Matthias's. Up close, he could see the scars that covered her knuckles, small white lines that spoke of hard work and harder years. Her nails were broken and dirty. Her dress, clearly made for someone a foot shorter, ended awkwardly at mid-calf, revealing boots that looked hand-cobbled from mismatched leather scraps. You don't know me, Willa said, and her voice carried a warning. You don't know what I am, what I've done. Then tell me. I killed a man. The crowd gasped. Several people stepped back. Reverend Makepeace made the sign of the cross. But Matthias didn't move, didn't let go of the bars. Tell me what happened, he said calmly. Willa's jaw tightened. New York, 5 years ago. There was a fire in the tenement building where I lived with my mother. She was a school teacher, taught me to read, to speak proper, to be a lady despite... She gestured at herself bitterly. Despite this, the fire took her. Smoke inhalation. I tried to save her, but I was too late. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. A man, one of the other tenants, he tried to stop me from going back in, grabbed me. I pushed him away, and he fell down the stairs. Broke his neck. The police said it was an accident, but the newspapers... She laughed, a sound like broken glass. The newspapers called me the giant murderess, said I was dangerous, unnatural, that women my size shouldn't exist. So you ran, Matthias said quietly. So I had no choice, no family, no money, no references. The mail-order bride service was the only option that would take me. Willa's eyes found Silas Grimm in the crowd, and her expression hardened. Mr. Grimm here promised me a fresh start out west, a farmer in Oregon who needed a strong wife and didn't care about appearances. But when we got to St. Louis, he put me in this cage, said I was more valuable as a curiosity than as a bride. He's been charging admission for 3 weeks now. 2 bits to stare. $5 for a private consultation. Matthias's blood went cold. Private consultation. Men who want to inspect the merchandise, Willa said flatly. See if I'm worth the risk. So far, 3 men have paid. 3 men have looked at me like I'm livestock and decided even a desperate homesteader has standards. Rage burned through Matthias's chest. He turned to face Grimm. And the mail-order bride agent took an involuntary step backward at whatever he saw in the rancher's eyes. You caged her, Matthias said, his voice deadly quiet. You took a woman who'd already lost everything, and you caged her like an animal. Now hold on, Cordell, Grim began. How much? Grim blinked. What? How much to buy out her contract? Matthias reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. His savings. Every dollar he had left in the world. Name your price. Grim's eyes lit with greed. Well now, she's been a profitable investment. I'd need at least $50, Matthias cut him off. That's what I have. It's also more than you'll make in the next month showing her off like a carnival attraction, because I'm going to tell the territorial marshal exactly what kind of private consultations you've been running. The color drained from Grim's face. You got no proof of... I got Edgar Finch, who runs the telegraph office and keeps records of every complaint filed in this territory, Matthias said. And I'm betting you got complaints, Grim. I'm betting there's wanted posters with your name in at least 3 states for fraud and false imprisonment. It was a bluff, but it landed. Grim's face went from pale to gray. $50, Matthias repeated, holding out the pouch. Take it and get on the next stage out of Montana, or stay and explain to Marshal Hawkins why you've been running what amounts to a human zoo. Grim snatched the money and fumbled with the cage lock, his hands shaking. She's all yours, you fool. And when she snaps your neck in your sleep, don't say I didn't warn you. The cage door swung open. Willa didn't move. She sat there, staring at the open door like it might be a trick, like it might slam shut if she reached for it. Miss Brenneman, Matthias said gently. You're free. Still she didn't move. Tears streamed down her face now, coming faster, and her breathing had gone shallow and quick. She whispered. I don't know how to be free anymore. Matthias understood then. The cage wasn't just iron bars. It was years of being told she was monstrous. Years of being stared at, feared, rejected. Years of trying to make herself small when the world had made her large. He held out his hand. Not demanding, not pulling, just offering. 1 step, he said. Just take 1 step, and I'll be right here. Willa looked at his hand, looked at his face, looked at the crowd of people who'd paid to gawk at her, who'd called her creature and monster, and worse. Then she unfolded herself and stood. The crowd gasped again. Because sitting, curled up, they could almost forget how tall she really was. But standing, Willa Brenneman towered over everyone in the square. Her head cleared Matthias's by more than a foot. Her shoulders were broader than most men's. Her hands, when she finally reached out to take his, could have engulfed his completely. But she took his hand with surprising gentleness. And when she stepped out of that cage, when her boots hit the mud of Redemption Springs as a free woman for the first time in weeks, she didn't let go. Will you marry me? Matthias asked again, his voice steady and sure. Not because you have to, not because you're desperate or trapped, but because I'm asking, and you have the freedom to choose. Willa looked down at this broken, limping, stubborn man who'd given away his last $50 to buy her freedom. This lonely rancher who'd knelt in the mud and begged when he could have commanded. This stranger who'd seen past the cage to the woman inside. Yes, she whispered. Then louder. Yes, I'll marry you, Matthias Cordell. Reverend Makepeace looked like he might protest, but Martha Finch, the telegraph operator's wife, stepped forward and fixed him with a look that could cut steel. Well, Reverend, Martha said. You going to marry them, or do I need to fetch the circuit preacher from Bozeman? Makepeace swallowed hard. In the church, a proper wedding, in the church. Now, Matthias said. It wasn't a request. The Reverend nodded weakly. Now. As they walked toward the church, Willa still holding Matthias's hand, the crowd parting before them like water. Widow Sutherland found her voice. "This is madness. Matthias, she'll destroy you. She'll—" Willa stopped walking. She turned to face the widow, and for the first time since stepping out of the cage, she stood at her full height. Didn't hunch, didn't try to shrink. "Mrs. Sutherland," Willa said, her voice carrying clear across the square. "You rejected this man because his spine was damaged, called him half a man because he walks with a limp, but he has more courage in his broken body than most whole men have in their entire lives." She paused. "I am tall, I am strong, I am different, but I am not cruel. Can you say the same?" The widow's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Willa turned back to Matthias and smiled, a real smile, tentative and fragile and beautiful. "Shall we get married, Mr. Cordell?" "I'd be honored, Miss Brenneman." They walked into the church together, and what happened next would be the first of many shocks Redemption Springs would receive from the lonely rancher and the giant bride everyone had feared. Willa stared at the broken rancher kneeling before her cage, and for the first time in 17 days, 17 endless days of being gawked at, mocked, and treated like an animal in a traveling show, she saw something in a man's eyes that wasn't fear or disgust. She saw desperation that matched her own. "You don't know what you're asking," Willa said softly. "You don't know what I am. I know you're a woman who's been treated worse than any human being should be treated," Matthias replied. "I know you're sitting in a cage in the middle of winter, wearing a dress that don't fit and boots held together with hope and string. I know Silas Grimm there has been charging good people money to stare at you like you're some kind of oddity instead of a person with feelings and dignity." Grimm's smirk faltered. "Now hold on. Cordell!" "Shut your mouth," Matthias snapped without looking at him. "You've profited enough off this woman's suffering." The crowd went dead silent. Nobody spoke to Silas Grimm that way. The man had connections, influence with the territorial mail-order bride network that stretched from New York to San Francisco. Cross him, and you'd never get a bride sent west, no matter how much you paid. But Matthias Cordell clearly didn't care. He turned back to Willa, and his weathered face softened. "I'm offering you a business arrangement, Miss Brenneman. Nothing more, nothing less. You help me save my ranch, and I give you a home and a name. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't force anything you don't want. You have my word on that." Willa searched his face, looking for the lie. Looking for the cruelty she'd learned to expect from men. Her father had been gentle before the consumption took him. Her brother had been kind before the tenement fire stole him away. But every man since had looked at her like she was either a freak to be feared or a beast to be exploited. This lonely rancher with his bad leg and desperate eyes looked at her like she was human. "Why should I believe you?" Willa asked, and her voice trembled despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Every man who's come to this cage has looked at me like I'm livestock, or worse. They measure my height like I'm a horse they're considering buying. They ask Grimm if I'm docile, if I can be controlled." Her hands clenched into fists. "You say pretty words, Mr. Cordell, but how do I know you're any different?" Matthias was quiet for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he shifted his weight and stood. The movement was awkward, painful. His right leg barely supported him. He had to grip the cage bars to keep from falling. When he finally straightened, as much as his damaged spine would allow, he looked Willa directly in the eyes. "You don't know," he said honestly. "You got no reason to trust me, Miss Brenneman. I'm a stranger asking you to trade one kind of cage for another, based on nothing but my word." He paused. "But I'll tell you this. 3 years ago, I held my wife's hand while she died. I promised Prudence I'd take care of our son, and then I had to bury him beside her before he ever drew a second breath. I made a vow that day, standing over those two graves. I'd never make a promise I couldn't keep. Not ever again. Something in his tone, the absolute conviction, the grief that still roughened the edges of his words, made Willa's throat tighten. So, I'm promising you now, Matthias continued. You come with me. You'll be treated with respect. You'll be fed proper, clothed proper, given work that's honest and fair. And you will never, not for one single day, be caged again. That's my word, Miss Willa Brenneman. And my word is all I got left that's worth a damn. Willa felt something crack inside her chest. Some hard, protective shell she'd built around her heart during those 17 days in the cage. During the months before that, being shipped west like cargo. During the years before that, being stared at and whispered about and treated like she was less than human because God had made her tall. This broken rancher was offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. A choice. The town will hate you for it, Willa said quietly, glancing at the crowd of pale, frightened faces surrounding them. They already think you've lost your mind. Let them think what they want. Matthias's jaw set stubbornly. I learned a long time ago that other people's opinions don't keep you warm at night or put food on the table. All that matters is what's true between two people. Widow Sutherland couldn't contain herself any longer. She pushed forward, her silk skirts rustling. Matthias Cordell, I am begging you to reconsider. That woman is dangerous. She could hurt you, kill you even. She's not natural. What's not natural, Matthias said coldly, is keeping a woman in a cage and charging admission to gawk at her. The widow recoiled as if slapped. Reverend Makepeace stepped forward. His Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. Brother Cordell, perhaps we should pray on this decision. Perhaps the Lord is testing your judgment. The Lord already tested me, Reverend, Matthias interrupted. He took my wife, my son, my health, and soon he'll take my land. I figure I got nothing left to lose and maybe, just maybe, something to gain. He looked back at Willa. So what do you say, Miss Brenneman? Will you marry me? Willa looked at the cage bars pressing against her shoulders. Looked at Silas Grimm's calculating eyes, already trying to figure out how much he could charge Matthias for the merchandise. Looked at the crowd of townspeople who saw her as a monster, a threat, something to be feared and avoided. Then she looked at Matthias Cordell, truly looked at him. She saw the pain etched into the lines around his eyes, the way he favored his left leg, trying not to show weakness, even though every movement clearly cost him. The calluses on his hands from years of hard work, the gray threading through his dark hair, put there by grief and hardship. She saw a man who'd lost everything and was making one last desperate gamble. Just like her. Yes, Willa whispered. The crowd gasped. What? Matthias breathed, as if he hadn't quite heard her. Willa raised her voice, letting it carry across the square. Yes, Mr. Cordell, I'll marry you. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then Matthias's face broke into the first genuine smile Willa had seen from anyone in months. It transformed him, made him look years younger, made the pain in his eyes recede just slightly. Thank you, he said hoarsely. Thank you, Miss Brenneman. He turned to Silas Grimm, and the smile vanished. Open the cage. Now. Grimm's expression turned shrewd. Well now, there's the matter of payment. She's prime merchandise, Cordell. Tall, strong, healthy. I was thinking $50 would be... 5, Matthias said flatly. 5, you insult me, sir. She's worth 10 times that. She's worth 1,000 times that, Matthias agreed. But you've been keeping a woman in a cage for 17 days, charging people to stare at her like she's some kind of carnival attraction. Far as I'm concerned, You should be paying me to take her off your hands before the territorial marshal hears about this and decides what you're doing might not be strictly legal." Grimm's face went pale. The territorial marshal was a hard man with firm opinions about the treatment of mail-order brides. If he heard about the cage— $10, Grimm said quickly. "Final offer." "5," Matthias repeated. "And you'll be grateful I don't report you." Grimm's jaw worked furiously, but he could see the trap closing around him. Half the town was watching. Reverend Makepeace was taking notes. If this turned into a legal matter, his entire operation could collapse. "Fine," he spat. $5. Robbery, that's what this is." Matthias pulled the money from his pocket, precious dollars he couldn't afford to spend, and handed them over. Grimm snatched them, then reluctantly unlocked the cage door. The hinges screamed as it swung open. Willa didn't move at first. She just stared at the open doorway like it might be a trick. Like the freedom might vanish if she reached for it. "It's all right," Matthias said gently. "Come on out, Miss Brenneman. You're free now." Slowly, carefully, Willa unfolded herself and stepped out of the cage. The crowd collectively took 3 steps backward. Because standing at her full height, Willa Brenneman was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. 6 feet and 6 inches of lean muscle and barely contained power. Her head was level with the top of Matthias's wagon. Her shoulders were broader than most men's. Her hands could probably palm a grown man's skull like an apple. She towered over Matthias by more than a foot, and she was shaking like a leaf. Matthias reached out and took Willa's trembling hand in his own. Her fingers dwarfed his, scarred and powerful, but her grip was surprisingly gentle, as if she was afraid of hurting him. "Reverend Makepeace," Matthias said, never taking his eyes off Willa. "We're ready." The Reverend looked like he'd rather perform an exorcism than a wedding, but he opened his Bible with shaking hands. Perhaps we should discuss the vows first. There are certain considerations when— "The regular vows will do just fine," Matthias interrupted. "Same ones you used for every other couple in this town. But the size difference, the practical matters, surely you need time to—" "Reverend." Matthias's voice went hard as iron. "Are you going to marry us or not?" Makepeace swallowed. Of course. Right here?" "In the square?" "In the church," Willa said suddenly. Her voice was quiet but firm. If I'm to be married, I want it done properly, in a church, like a real bride." Something in the way she said, "real bride," broke Matthias's heart a little. As if she'd spent so long being treated as less than human that even basic dignity felt like too much to ask. "The church it is," he agreed. They walked together down Main Street, this broken rancher and the giant woman everyone feared, with half of Redemption Springs trailing behind like they were witnessing either a wedding or a funeral and couldn't quite decide which. The church sat at the end of the street, white-clappered with a modest steeple, and as they climbed the steps, Willa had to duck to fit through the doorway. Inside, the ceiling was barely high enough for her to stand upright. She looked around the simple sanctuary, the wooden pews, the plain altar, the single stained glass window depicting the Good Shepherd, and tears spilled down her cheeks again. "My mother and I used to attend services every Sunday in New York," she whispered. "Before the fire, before everything. I haven't been inside a church since her funeral." Matthias squeezed her hand. "Then this is a good place for a new beginning." Reverend Makepeace positioned himself at the altar, and Matthias and Willa stood before him. The pews behind them filled slowly. Edgar and Martha Finch sat in the front row, Martha already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Widow Sutherland slipped into a back pew, her face pinched with disapproval. A handful of curious townspeople crowded in, whispering behind their hands. And now, before we continue with this moment, that will change everything. We want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Are you in Texas, Montana, maybe somewhere overseas? Drop your location in the comments. We love knowing our story family is spread across the world. And if you haven't already, hit that notification bell so you never miss what happens next in stories like this. Because what's about to happen will shock everyone in that church, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Dearly beloved, Makepeace began, his voice unsteady. We are gathered here in the sight of God to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Willa barely heard the words. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was happening. Actually, happening. After 17 days in a cage, after months of being shipped west like cargo, after years of being called a freak and a monster, she was standing in a church, about to become someone's wife. A wife, not a curiosity, not merchandise. A wife. Do you, Matthias John Cordell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Makepeace asked. I do, Matthias said clearly, firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. And do you, Willa? Makepeace paused. I'm sorry, I don't know your middle name. Rose, Willa said softly. Willa Rose Brenneman. Do you, Willa Rose Brenneman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Willa looked down at Matthias. This lonely rancher with his bad leg and desperate hope. This stranger who'd knelt in the mud and begged her to marry him. This man who'd spent his last $5 to buy her freedom from Silas Grimm's cage. I do, she whispered. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, Makepeace said quickly, as if afraid someone might object, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride. Matthias looked up at Willa, suddenly uncertain. They hadn't discussed this part, hadn't even considered the logistics of a man who stood 5'8" trying to kiss a woman who topped 6'6". Willa solved the problem by kneeling. She dropped to her knees on the church floor, bringing herself eye level with Matthias, and the simple humility of the gesture made Martha Finch sob outright. Hello, husband, Willa said, and there was the ghost of a smile on her lips. Hello, wife, Matthias replied. He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands and kissed her. It was brief, chaste, appropriate for a church full of witnesses. But it was real, the first kiss Willa had received since her father kissed her forehead the night before he died. When they pulled apart, Matthias helped her stand, and they turned to face the sparse congregation as husband and wife. Ladies and gentlemen, Makepeace announced weakly, Mr. and Mrs. Matthias Cordell. Edgar Finch started clapping. Martha joined him. A few others followed, the applause scattered and uncertain, but present nonetheless. Widow Sutherland did not clap. She stood abruptly and left the church, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Matthias didn't even watch her go. He was too busy looking at Willa, at the way the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass window painted her face in shades of amber and gold. Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Cordell? He asked. Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked out of the church together, and waiting outside was Matthias's wagon, a simple flatbed with a canvas cover pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her with visible effort, his bad leg making the movement awkward. As they drove out of Redemption Springs, Willa looked back once at the town square, at the empty cage still sitting where Silas Grimm had left it. Stop, she said suddenly. Matthias pulled the horses to a halt. What's wrong? Willa climbed down from the wagon and walked back to the cage. She stood before it for a long moment, this iron box that had held her for 17 days. Then she gripped the bars, the same bars Matthias had pressed his hands against while begging her to marry him, and she pulled. Metal shrieked, bolts popped loose. The cage frame bent and twisted in her powerful hands like it was made of willow branches instead of iron. In less than a minute, Willa had reduced the cage to a mangled pile of scrap metal. She stood over the wreckage, breathing hard, and when she turned back to Matthias, her eyes blazed with something fierce and free. "No one else," she said. "No one else gets caged." Matthias smiled, a real smile, proud and admiring. "No one else," he agreed. They rode for 3 hours through the Montana wilderness, following a rough trail that wound through pine forests and across frozen streams. Willa sat quietly, taking in the vast sky, the snow-capped mountains in the distance, the space that seemed to stretch on forever. Space. Room to breathe. Room to be tall without apologizing for it. Finally, as the sun began to set, they crested a ridge and Matthias pointed down into a valley. "There," he said. "The Double C Ranch. You're home now." Willa looked down at the collection of buildings nestled in the valley, a main house that needed paint, a barn with a sagging roof, fences that clearly needed mending, and beyond it all, rolling pasture land dotted with cattle. It wasn't much, but it was beautiful. "It needs work," Matthias admitted. "A lot of work. The house, the barn, the fences, all of it. I've been trying to keep up on my own, but—" He gestured at his leg. "I can work," Willa said simply. They rode down into the valley as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. When they reached the main house, Matthias helped Willa down from the wagon, though she clearly didn't need help, and led her inside. The house was cold. Dust covered every surface. Dishes sat unwashed in the basin. A man's coat hung on a peg by the door, and nothing else suggested a woman had ever lived there. "I know it's not much," Matthias said, suddenly embarrassed. "I've let things go since Prudence died. Just been surviving, not really living." Willa walked slowly through the main room, her head nearly brushing the ceiling beams. She ran her finger along the mantel, looked at the cold fireplace, the table set for one. "Where did she die?" Willa asked quietly. Matthias pointed to a closed door. "Bedroom. I sleep out here now, on the floor by the fire. Couldn't bear to." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Willa nodded. "I'll take the bedroom then, if that's all right." "Of course. I'll build a fire. Get you settled." "Matthias." Willa turned to face him. "I know this is just business. I know you married me because you need help with the ranch. But I want you to know—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I will work hard for you. I will earn my keep. You won't regret this." "I already don't regret it," Matthias said. Then, softer, "Thank you, Willa, for saying yes, for giving me a chance." "Thank you," Willa replied, "for seeing me as a person, not a monster." That first night, Matthias built a fire while Willa explored her new home. The bedroom was small, too small for someone her size, but it had a window that looked out over the valley, and when she opened it, cold, clean air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and snow and freedom. She heard Matthias moving around in the main room, heard him banking the fire, settling down for the night. And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time in her entire life, Willa Brenneman felt safe. She was Mrs. Willa Cordell now, a rancher's wife, a woman with a home and a purpose, and a husband who'd knelt in the mud and begged her to marry him, not because he wanted to own her, but because he needed her. Outside her window, the Montana stars blazed like diamonds scattered across black velvet, and Willa thought of her mother, buried in New York, beneath a sky you could barely see for all the city smoke. "I made it, Mama," she whispered to the night. "I'm finally free." In the main room, Matthias lay on his bedroll by the dying fire and thought about the impossible woman sleeping in his dead wife's bedroom. The giant mail-order bride everyone feared. The woman who destroyed her cage with her bare hands and then cried when he kissed her in the church. He thought about the 60 days he had left before the bank took his ranch. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd found exactly the partner he needed to save it. What neither of them knew, as they fell asleep in their separate rooms, was that saving the ranch would be the least of what they accomplished together. Because in 3 weeks' time, a spring flood would threaten Redemption Springs. Children would be trapped in a schoolhouse, water rising, death approaching. And the giant mail-order bride everyone feared would do something that would shock the entire territory and change everything they thought they knew about monsters and miracles. But that first night, all Matthias and Willa knew was that they'd made a bargain. A business arrangement between two desperate people. They had no idea they'd just started the greatest love story Montana had ever seen.